Don't click that remote, because if you do, you're going to miss a really, 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 really good show. Because our guest is Bruno Behrend. Look, this guy knows everything about everything. He especially knows about socialism and capitalism. We're taping this on March 17th, so the big theme of the day is, what is the philosophy we want? What kind of government do you want? What kind of country do you want to live in? Do you want to be in a free, market-oriented country? Do you want to be in a socialist, planned economy? Really, we're thinking really, really, really big thoughts. Don't click that remote, because if you do, you're going to miss Bruno Behrend, senior fellow at the Heartland Institute, and you'll miss a really, 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 really good show. All right, I think that was somewhat closer to 2 seconds. We'll start now. All right, you're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening, because as I promised, we've got Bruno Behrend. Bruno is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute. You'll see the graphic. It'll also say Director, Center for Transforming Education. It's not quite true, but if you like that title, Bruno says you can use that. If you want to call him a senior fellow, whatever. The basic thing, all kidding aside, the Heartland Institute, most would know, is one of the two major conservative think tanks in the state of Illinois. We'll come to the second one as we get into the show, but Heartland was the first major conservative think tank.
Right.
And still, there's only really two.
It was the first state-based think tank modeled off of some of the think tanks like Heritage and Cato, and it was the first state-based think tank in Illinois focusing on Illinois issues.
But in Illinois, there are only really two conservative think tanks, are there?
That are
major,
well, and Heartland is now actually not only covering Illinois issues, but it basically is covering
national,
all states.
But
national.
In Illinois, there's only, its base is in Illinois.
Right.
It has some people working out of other areas of the country,
right.
But its base is here in Chicago.
Correct.
Is there another conservative think tank in
yes,
Illinois?
There is, the Illinois Policy Institute.
Okay, and that's also based in Chicago.
Right.
Now, are there any other conservative think tanks that you can think of in the state of Illinois?
Not that I know of. There's
right.
a few other C4s and some other things that people are doing conservatively, but those are the two think tanks.
And so we're talking this evening about 10, what I've called 10 liberal mainstream media myths. If you look at the Sun-Times, it's a wonderful paper, I subscribe to it, and you look at their columnists, Carol Maureen, Laura Washington, Lynn Sweet, who am I leaving out? There are one or two others.
Mark Brown.
Mark Brown. There are a few like more femme fatales there. Really, they specialize in liberal female.
And I read the online version of some articles.
Tom McNamee is here, pretty liberal guy, I think. He's the editorial page editor. He once said, Jeff, I don't want to say what he said. It's really funny. Okay, but I'm just saying, if that's what you get from the Sun-Times, when you go to the Tribune, the editorial positions are quite conservative on the economic side, pretty more moderate and maybe even liberal on the social issue side.
Right.
And then the Daily Herald kind of, I think, now leans left as opposed to right, would you say? Maybe it's down the center.
I would say it's down the center.
At least on economic issues.
Let's put it this way, for the mainstream media, it's in the center, which means it's still left.
But but folks, if you're watching 2, 5, 7 local stations, I would say they lean left of center.
Yeah.
Social and economic issues,
sure.
The local stations. CBS, ABC, NBC affiliates, and of course TTW leans left. I used to joke, TTW covers the entire spectrum of thought from the middle to the far left.
Exactly.
They kind of completely cut it off from the middle to the right.
Correct.
I mean, to be fair, they sometimes balance panels. They often balance panels. They can have a conservative or liberal. I just don't think they have anybody working at the station who would be viewed as to the right of center. Right. I think even I'm betting the administrative people, the professional folks, everything. It's like it must be in the water. I think this could happen to me because I'm on the community advisory board and I'm there once every 2 months, and I've been drinking from their water fountain. Have you noticed? Have I become more liberal?
No, I don't think you've become more liberal. So I wouldn't go so that far.
Okay, so that's 11, and WGN is also leaning left with Paul Lisnick from CLTV. Paul and I have had a little debate about this. He says he doesn't really lean left. Do you think that's true?
I've been on Paul's show a couple times, and he does a nice job questioning people. But
But have
I
you
think
ever seen him
the
rigorously challenge a liberal? Because
whole-
sometimes he challenges conservatives.
We don't
but he
really
doesn't
have to go into
rigorously
detail. The whole apparatus is
Bruno,
left.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do mean to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Do you think Paul Lisnek is really down the middle, or does he lean left or right?
I think everybody leans left
Okay. In the mainstream media.
in the mainstream
All
media.
right, enough.
It's
So,
the soup they swim in.
so the first myth we're going to deal with of the liberal mainstream media is government-run schools are good for society.
Right.
Okay?
That's their viewpoint.
And how could you really argue with that? Because government is inherently good, and then people say schools are the great equalizer. Did you go to public school?
Yes, I did
Okay.
go to public school.
That's what people say, because
a long time
90%
ago.
of people did, because you almost had to be rich not to, because your parents, who paid, in most cases, paid property taxes, that's how they financed schools. You sort of sought to be in an area where you have good schools, you might pay high property taxes. To opt out of the public schools mean you're going to pay double.
Right.
So 90% or so currently go to public schools, maybe even higher. So people turn to you and say, did you go to public schools? Yes. Okay, well, they must be good because you're good. It's kind of the stupidest thing I've ever heard, okay?
Yeah,
But
pretty
people
much.
say that. So governments run schools, and also people don't get the difference between, well, let me ask you. I'm going to stop. I'm going to feature my guest here.
Okay.
Myth. Is it, if it's a myth that government-run schools are not good for, if it's a myth to say that government-run schools are good for society, why is it a myth?
Because there's no reason for education to be centralized in a central authority like government. They've been centralizing education in America for the last 70 to 100 years, and it's only been getting more narrow. It's only been hurting more people. The rich always do well, not because of this government schools, but because of the socioeconomic status of the rich people, and the poor and the disadvantaged are getting a worse and worse education. There's no reason for government to produce education. You can make an argument that government can finance education. There's no reason for government to produce it.
That's a key point. So if people don't understand that, government financing means that if government is paying for it, so they can give individuals money, they can give everybody.
Right.
Because if we spend in Chicago now $15,000 per kid per year, that includes money that comes to the Chicago public schools from the federal government,
Right.
from the state government, from the local property taxes, the whole schmear. Okay.
But remember, when they say they spend $15,000 per kid per year, that's merely a division. They're merely taking a big bucket of money and dividing it by the number of kids. So what we ought to ask the audience is, just imagine every single one of those kids had $15,000 following them to the school of their choice. And to make the case that the education system wouldn't be 1,000% better for every kid is insane.
That's your point. I think it's a good one. It's even a stronger point than voucher school choice. And really, I learned this from you, Bruno. I mean, because you've talked, if you put the money with the kid,
Right.
and you say it's an education stamp, say you want to limit it, the $15,000 can only be spent on education, it doesn't necessarily have to go to a school. It could go to educating oneself at home.
Right.
It could go to buying all sorts of computer software that might be educational.
Right.
It could be to using the money to go to museums to be educated.
Or-
all sorts of ways that you and I maybe not even thought of. That's the benefit of freedom.
Right.
Which
And
is
it
we'll
could,
come to.
here's an even better deal. It could be $8,000, and it's in an education savings account that they put the money into an education savings account every year, and then we can take that $7,000 that they're currently wasting on pensions, on a massive number of unnecessary administrators, which could all be let go and fired in terms of government waste, and the money could actually follow the child to a vast new array of education resources, and we could just dismantle the entire education bureaucracy.
So you're saying you could possibly, very likely, cut down the amount spent on
Dramatically.
education and actually improve the quality of education
Dramatically.
by allowing free choices, allowing individuals to choose different ways to spend. Some may choose to go to a private school, some may even choose to go to a public school,
Right.
some may self-educate.
Charter, self-educate.
Freedom's a wonderful thing. We have this thing called, here I got in front of me, a Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America here, okay? They're two really important documents. But basically, would you say the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, do they embody the concept of freedom?
Yeah, I think most people would agree with that.
They're kind of like Tea Party issues.
It's very controversial, though. Controversial
Freedom?
document. Our president, yeah.
Is it controversial to be for
Our
freedom?
president has said that there were a lot of flaws in the Constitution.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Barack Obama?
Yeah.
Did he list any of the flaws?
Probably at some
Well, there
point
was
in time.
slavery. Slavery was embedded originally in the Constitution.
No one
He's
would-
he's right about that one.
He's right about that.
That's one. Can
Yeah.
you think of another one?
I'm trying really hard.
Can't.
If
Okay.
anything, they omitted too much.
Barack, it's been a long time. He was last here in July of 2004. We're running up to the decade. Could you come on back? They're closing Skokie. This is one of the last shows in the Skokie Comcast studio. You sat here, Barack. You were in Skokie. We'll open it up just for you if you'll come back from the White House to Skokie. You think he's coming?
I think he should.
All right. We can come back to that. Enough government-run schools are not good for society. We should, if anything, have government finance, give it to the individuals, but have those schools be run by private individuals, private firms. Let freedom ring.
Tutors, software, everything.
Let freedom ring. Who said that? Let freedom ring? Somebody, okay.
Some country western stuff.
All right, true, okay. So competition via free market but publicly financed schools benefit society the most. We've established that. Let's go on to the liberal mainstream media. Number 2 myth, our governments are without waste. You hear this all the time. You turn on Chew 5 or 7, 9, TTW, Carol Marie would tell, oh, it's cut to the waste. Cook County government, we just don't have anything left. Oh, state government, oh, we can just barely get by. Oh, the federal government.
It's nuts.
Carol couldn't be wrong, could she?
Carol Marine's absolutely wrong if that's what she says. There's so much waste in government, it's not even funny.
So, okay, that's your point. How much would you estimate? Because we were talking before the show, if you add up the amount of our wealth in this country, our annual flow of output that we produce, which is about $17 trillion, or gross domestic product, and you add up what's spent and goes to federal government, and goes to state government,
And local.
and goes to county government, village government. Look, this is all, like when we saw government-run schools, the CPS is a government sort of
I heard a recent
school.
estimate, there's 90,000 units of government in the United States, and they take in, and when you take everything that they spend, it's somewhere between 39 and 41% of GDP.
I think it's higher because, you know, when Peter Fitzgerald ran for the U.S. Senate in 1998, he and I actually talked about that, and he was running for the U.S. Senate. And he said then, federal, state, and local, it was about 40%.
Right.
And I think
Should be
in the
higher
last
now?
14 years, I think government has grown, has not gotten smaller. But anyway, we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
It's between 40 to 50%. So it's somewhere between $7 to $8 trillion on government spending. And
that does
10% of that would be about 800 billion, close to $1 trillion in it has to be 10% waste at least.
At
okay?
least.
So
least.
$1 trillion if you cut out the waste. And I don't know, we'll have a debate. Carol, we've asked Carol Marine to come on. I don't mean to pick on Carol, but she is uniformly thought to be the epitome of fairness for people who watch Chicago Tonight on WTTW. Not sure why. Because she is an opinionated columnist, and there's nothing wrong with that for the Sun-Times. Everybody who reads her columns would know she's on the left.
Right.
Now, you could say when she does panels on WTTW, she tries and succeeds to be completely the white line down the middle of the road.
Based on my experience of watching, let's put it this way, I've stopped watching Chicago Tonight for basically, if they have an issue where they have a conservative on there, it's usually the same conservative that's over and over again.
Token conservative.
Token conservative, who's usually not that articulate, and there's usually 3 people against him.
Okay. Myth number 3 of the liberal mainstream media. Private business makes extravagant profits. Don't you think that's true? Because you know a lot of businesses like Coca-Cola, like Starbucks, like Dominick's, all of those, they must just make extravagant profits, right?
I don't understand who gets to define extravagant. I mean,
well, more than the normal rate of return, because we learned, all of us studied economics, and we know that there is something called a normal rate of return, a competitive rate of return. And in pure competition, everybody makes a normal profit, and supernormal profits are above the average. Are you with me so far?
I don't think that, I would dispute that
Really?
Econ 101.
Why would you dispute that?
Well, first of all, the way capitalism works is if you have an idea, if you have something that is a really good idea, and you can make an iPhone, was BlackBerry earning abnormal rates of return before the iPhone came out and completely crushed their business model? And is Apple earning an unfair rate of return because their product was better than everybody
unfair
else's?
is different. No, economics is not very subjective. It's not normative. It's positive. So I've never said it was unfair. In my view, a normal rate of return is what's necessary to get people to continue to invest in that process, a competitive rate of return. Now, if you come up with a good idea, for a while, you will probably be making a supranormal rate of return, above normal.
Right.
But if you have a free market, firms come in, they mimic what you do,
okay.
They drive down your profits to a normal rate of return. That's the competitive model. That's Adam Smith.
Unless,
Are you going to dispute Adam Smith's Wealth of
Well,
Nations?
the way you described it there, I'm not going to dispute that. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Excuse me, I was inarticulate before. You've corrected me. Okay.
I just clarify.
But the point is, now we know what extravagant means, above normal. Do businesses in general make above normal profits, do you think, in general?
No.
For long periods of time?
No.
No, they probably are lucky if they can make a normal profit.
I mean, unless
because notice I mentioned Dominick's. Dominick's went away.
Regulated
at least in this
monopolies,
area.
regulated monopolies and regulated oligopolies can earn those profits, and they did during
If they can block entry.
the banks,
if they can block free
Goldman
market
Sachs, all of those.
entry. If they can use government to block entry.
Exactly.
If you can't block entry, you cannot keep
So the
profits
only
above
businesses that can make abnormal rates of return are businesses that are protected and or have crony capitalism at some point with the government.
The government.
Yeah.
I taught my kids when they grew up, and they would tell you this is true, now they're grown up.
Mm-hmm.
If you learn this from Milton Friedman, if you trace any problem far enough, okay, you will find government at the other end.
Pretty close to the truth.
Do you have kids?
I have one kid.
Okay. Are you teaching your child that?
My child is a 24-year-old Marine.
Now has he
pretty
learned-
much already
Did he
knows
already
that.
knows that? Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
He already knows that.
All right, but if you had a chance to teach other children, you would certainly teach them that?
Yeah, pretty close to the truth.
Okay. So it's a myth that private business makes extravagant profits. People have studied this. If you look at the broad range, hundreds and hundreds of industries, manufacturing, service, et cetera, through the whole categories, we find in the United States, in a free market, on average, people make a normal rate of return.
Right.
No more, no less. That's the way competition works. And even with the government out there protecting, as they have airlines and other entities from time to time, we've pretty much deregulated. We pretty much have a free economy. It's not unfettered, but would you agree we pretty much have a free economy in the United States?
I actually think it's getting worse.
It's getting worse?
Yeah.
Well, the airlines, there's more competition there than there was 30 years ago, right?
I'm more than happy to concede that there's areas where things have done pretty well, but the fact of
Where's
the
it
matter
getting worse?
Let's look at quote-unquote success stories like Tesla and compare them to what's going on with Government Motors and GM and Ford. Should Chrysler have been bailed out in the late 70s? I would argue no. What's been happening is that the bleed over of private and public has gotten so aggressive that what you basically have is the rent seeking in business has gotten bad enough that businesses are now making more money going after government protection, government contracts.
It's a whole nother show.
That's a whole other show.
Myth number 4, market failure is rampant. Is that right? Do you find markets failing all over? Like people give as an example of market failure, if you go back to studying basic economics, say you have a lighthouse. The lighthouse is out there, the boats are all benefiting from this lighthouse, whatever boats get from that lighthouse, and it's hard to charge for it individually because people can, circle around and make use of the lighthouse, and how do you know whether they're making use, they're paying? So a lighthouse has been given as an example of a market failure. If you want to have the optimal number of lighthouses, you have to figure out and collectivize this in some way. Individuals can't get together who all benefit from the lighthouse and sort of make sure somebody doesn't take a free ride. Am I coming through?
Yeah, and I don't...
Would you say the lighthouse might be an example where you have to have some collectivized government effort?
The way you explained it, you could theorize that there are things that might be...
Yeah, there are. I'm not saying there are many
traffic lights.
I'm not saying
roads.
there are many lighthouses in the country.
Right.
There's like a few left.
But there was an...
Roads are not, because you can have toll roads and you can stop.
Yes,
and
you can
charge people.
Yeah.
So we figured that out.
Right.
Okay. And police, you can have private security forces, but you may want to have certain things. We're not anarchists completely.
Right.
You may want to have a certain number of police, a certain military effort,
I think
few other things.
libertarian theory says that there are times to monopolize the use of
Okay.
force, which is what governments are for.
But generally, market failure is not rampant. You would
Market failure
agree.
is mostly a myth.
But the opposite of market failure, you shouldn't say this is a market fail without asking the question, does the government fail? Because often somebody says, I keep coming back, but like Carol, I think Carol might say this, my dear friend Carol Marie.
Okay.
She might say, oh, the government has failed in this case. Excuse me, she wouldn't say that. The free market has failed. We have to have government intervention. But she doesn't realize often governments fail. So what you want to balance and say, is the government more likely or likely to make the situation better or worse? So they've entered with schools. They've apparently made it worse. They've entered in healthcare. Some would say made it worse.
Right.
So we should always ask, not is there market failure, but is the government suggested remedy likely to make it better or worse? Because you can make things worse, right?
And in many, many situations, you know, you don't want to say most, you don't want to look at every single thing. Like, as you said, we could do a half-hour show on each one of these issues.
We're not. We're just going to do a minute
But the
or two.
fact of the matter is that market failure, as promoted by the left or the liberal viewpoint, they mostly get it wrong. And where markets have failed, particularly, look at the meltdown. Look at the savings and loan crisis back in the early 90s.
Caused by the government.
These were
not
all
by the free
government-caused market
market.
failures.
The Community Renewal Act kind of fueled eventually the kind of crash we had in 2008 when the government pushed people into housing they couldn't really afford.
Most market failure is regulatory
Okay.
failure.
But yeah, on the other hand, government failure is rampant. Look at Cook County government, obviously a failure. Look at many aspects of state government. Look at the corruption that's throughout these things. Often
Right.
you find somebody says, oh, here's a charter school, and somebody would embezzle. That could happen. And also the charter school is not really private, it's more public. But they never talk about the public schools that has rampant fraud in it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another myth. Mainstream media, notice, don't say market failure is rampant, say government failure is rampant. I expect they'll all convert as soon as they watch the show.
I think they will.
Myth, Social Security has been a roaring success. Is that a myth? or
I
is that
give Social Security a C. I don't give it an F. A lot of people give it an F.
The gentleman C is not a success. It's like a mediocre performance.
It's a mediocre performance.
But truth, I would say truth, private retirement accounts outperform Social Security.
I think
Would that be true? On average.
this
Some
is-
private accounts will go bad, some government things will go bad, but on average, would you expect and do you observe private retirement accounts on average? Because what's the average rate of return? Somebody who pays into Social Security and then gets their money back. Do you know the average rate of return?
Overall, the average rate of return on it fluctuates, but
What's your best
basically
guess?
you're looking at about 3 to
No,
anywhere
you're
two and
looking
a-
at 1.3%. The estimates are, on average,
for Social Security or
yes,
for private.
for Social Security.
Right. I was talking
okay.
about private.
So
private
Social
is
Security
somewhere
is
between 3.5 to 4%. It's been as high
private.
as 7.
Private 3.5 to 7%. Social Security 1.3%.
Right.
Which would you rather have? Social Security?
Well, if you
or
were
private?
a low income earner over the years, you would say that you want the Social Security
You're right.
because for them it works better.
Because they put in less and they get out
they
more.
get out more.
Okay. Myth number 6. We're just moving along here really quickly.
Actually, can I do one interjection? Let me do one interjection
Quick,
on Social
quick.
Security. I support, and I think this is there's a great deal of intellectual support for this, that the system should be hybrid. There should be a Social Security system and that has
a certain amount of forced savings.
For
we
a
like
cer-
the forced
a
savings.
certain
of
amount of
Social
forced
Security.
savings.
Not completely, because if you take away all that flexibility, we
Correct.
want individuals to be able to invest not
Yeah.
necessarily in pork bellies, but pick a mutual fund, pick a diversified stock fund,
Right.
diversified bond fund.
A hybrid
Give them
system.
choice, give them competition.
Right.
Maybe they can find investors, somebody like Bruce Rauner, who will invest their money better than Kirk Dillard.
Exactly.
Just hypothetically.
Just
Kirk
hypothetically.
Bruce, we don't play favorites. And I don't really know who's going to win tomorrow. Although I said a
Well,
month
by
ago.
the time this airs, we'll know.
I said a month ago it would be Bruce Rauner. So I'm going to have a lot of egg on my face because I said he was going to win like 50%. The second closest, 26%.
Well, we'll have to see if that happens.
Go out on a limb. I'm a risky guy. Okay, number 6. Medicare is a big success. Myth or truth?
It's a myth.
The truth is Medicare recipients are often refused service. How successful? Now you can find someplace, if you're in Chicago, sometimes people I know, like I live, in Evanston, and I have one of my neighbors sort of on Medicare. she can get service, but she has to go down to the south side.
and what
she has to go to Providence Hospital because that's the only place that
and
will
what
give her
Medicare
she
was
wants.
is Medicare was it started off, and it always has been, a single payer system for the elderly. And what it did, to the extent that it worked, to the extent it held down costs, those costs were shifted more and more to the private insurance system, which became more and more of a kludge.
It set ceilings on cost, and then so
Yeah.
that's why doctors often decline to service those people because they're being reimbursed at 20% of their
And it just got
costs.
worse and worse and worse over time.
Now, and people get something out of it. You paid into it, you get something. Could you have done better to take the money you paid into Medicare, put it into private health savings accounts, and gotten a better service? So that's what people don't realize. You paid into it. You put stuff into it. It's not a freebie, okay?
Right.
Did you get your money's worth? I think the answer is no. We got to go on.
Okay.
Number 7, myth. Minimum wages are good for society. Myth or truth?
Minimum wage is a very bad idea. It's
seems
not
like-
necessary.
No, Bruno, if you were you're like a teenager and say you just got your first job in Illinois, they have to pay you $8.25 above the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25, $8.25 an hour, and without the minimum wage, you might get in Illinois the federal, which would be $7.25, or without the federal, you might get $5 an hour. So you're getting $3 more an hour. That's got to be good.
No, because I'd rather have what's better for a kid who's just starting out, a $5, $5.25, $7.50 an hour, $6.50 an hour job that he does have, or an $8.25 an hour job that he doesn't have.
Oh, because you mean some employer may say the skills are not enough to warrant paying you $8.25.
Yeah.
So the employer, being rational, says your productivity is at $5 an hour. I'm being forced to pay $8 an hour. I'm not going to hire you.
And there's already, you see, here's the funny thing when it comes to policy. There's already good ideas on the table to get rid of the minimum wage. And one of them is you just expand Milton Friedman's idea, which was the earned income tax credit.
Or a negative income tax.
Or a negative income
Help
tax.
to give them income, but let them work and earn as much as they can,
Yeah.
and then supplement their income. So
Supplement.
they get the dignity of labor, the feeling they've contributed $5 of the $8. If you're going to supplement it that way, don't force an employer to pay to not hire them.
These are all much more workable ideas.
It's all here. Capitalism and Freedom, Milton Friedman, Free to Choose, Milton Friedman. Rose
Exactly.
Friedman, all ideas here.
Paul Ryan, premium
50
support.
years ago, folks, 60 years ago.
You know, premium support instead of Obamacare.
Keep going. We're moving along here, okay? Myth. Society needs a government energy plan.
That's ridiculous.
We have to have a government energy. Without a plan, how can we possibly generate the right amount of energy?
Because if you need energy, the market will call for energy, and then the market will produce the energy.
Truth. Free market outperforms the government plan. So a government plan would be a socialist plan. In a free enterprise, you don't have planning. You have thousands of individuals interacting, being led by the invisible hand of wealth of nations to seek profit, but as they seek profit, they provide a service to society.
And that's the theoretical underpinning, which is accurate.
Okay.
The real underpinning is look at what's going on in Germany right now, where they have shut down their nuclear power. They're anti-oil, they're anti-carbon.
They're going back to the Stone Age. Don't even tell me about Germany. Okay, number 9, myth. Individuals should be required to perform government service. Of course that would be good. I mean, your kids and everybody, they should learn in school, perform government service, go into the military, do this, do that. Don't ask, what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country because you want to be in servitude to your country. Because this thing abolished slavery eventually, but now people would like to bring it back and say, Bruno, you must work for the government. Is that bad? Is that bad?
Of course it's bad. It's one of those, but I will say this, it is one of those things that you could make a case, and this would be where I part ways with some of the libertarian theoreticians. You could make a case that that everybody has to have some skin in the game, and whatever
you
that's.
You could make that case, but that would be the wrong one. Thank you so much, Bruno Behrend, for coming here. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll.
Okay.
But I very much want to thank Bruno Behrend. You can find out more about him by going to heartland.org. You can find out about the conservative think tank Heartland the Heartland Institute by going to heartland.org. We mentioned the Illinois Policy Institute. You can find out about them by going to illinoispolicy.org.
I think it's illinoispolicy.org.
Okay. If you're interested in the free market, if you want to hear many of these ideas, I've stolen from those guys, go to the Illinois Policy Institute, go to Heartland. Myth 10, economic growth only benefits the rich. The truth, growth is a poverty escape mechanism.